He swore to live by the rules and never stray from his faith. But one encounter revealed the truth he had been hiding from himself for years. The forbidden feelings that society had ordered him to suppress broke through. This is a story about love that defies fear, betrayal, and condemnation, and changes destinies forever. I still remember that afternoon with a clarity that unsettles me. New York is a city that rarely pauses, yet on that particular day, the air felt heavy, as though time itself had slowed down just enough to let something unexpected slip through the cracks. I had been sitting outside a small cafe near campus, my laptop open but untouched, the cursor blinking on a blank page I hadn't been able to fill. My mind had been drifting restlessly, scrolling through half-formed thoughts when he appeared. At first, I noticed only the outline. A tall figure moving with a kind of purposeful restraint, his steps measured, his back perfectly straight, as though every inch of him had been trained to behave in a certain way. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves pressed so sharply they caught the sunlight, and a dark jacket that seemed almost too formal for the warm day. There was nothing inherently unusual about the way he looked. This was New York after all, a city where business attire blended seamlessly with casual chaos. But something about him made me look again. It was the stillness. Everyone else rushed, hurried, stumbled through the streets. He did not. He moved slowly, carefully, as though the world around him was a test, and he had to pass it without breaking a single rule. When he drew closer, I saw his face, and that's when everything inside me shifted. His features were calm, disciplined, almost rehearsed. He looked like the kind of man who had been raised to keep his head high and his words polite. But it wasn't his composure that caught me. It was his eyes. There was a weight in them, a flicker that betrayed everything his posture tried to hide. I'd seen eyes like that before, though rarely. Eyes that carried both certainty and deep uncertainty, eyes that try to mask one truth by clinging to another. He was young, maybe my age, but those eyes carried an exhaustion, as though he had been wrestling with questions no one else could hear. He stopped not far from where I sat, adjusting the strap of the worn leather bag over his shoulder. For a moment, I thought he would simply pass by, just another stranger in a city full of them. But then he looked directly at me. Not a fleeting glance, not the kind of accidental eye contact that happens when two strangers notice each other. This was deliberate, steady, and far too long to be casual. I felt something in my chest tighten. "Good afternoon," he said finally, his voice low, controlled, and strangely careful. There was no trace of New York in his accent. His words carried the faint softness of someone raised elsewhere, maybe somewhere quieter, smaller. I closed my laptop slowly, pretending to buy myself time, though really I was just unsettled by how easily he had disrupted my thoughts. "Afternoon," I replied, leaning back in my chair, trying to sound casual. He hesitated, just enough to notice, just enough to reveal that his approach hadn't been entirely planned. Then he added, "I'm David." Only after a pause did he continue, almost reluctantly, "My family is religious. Conservative." The way he said it made the word conservative sound heavier than usual, like a burden rather than an identity. I nodded, pretending not to overthink it, though inside my mind raced. He wasn't wearing the casual markers of New York students, nor the easy expressions of someone free to do as they pleased. No, he carried the restraint of someone who had been told his entire life that he was being watched by God, by family, by the world. I studied him for a moment, maybe longer than was polite. "You look like you take all that pretty seriously." A shadow passed over his face, quick but unmistakable. He forced a small smile, the kind people use when they're trained to appear polite, no matter how they feel. "I try," he answered, but his eyes betrayed him again. There was doubt there, doubt he didn't want me to see. I should have let him move on. I should have nodded, wished him well, and gone back to staring at the blank page on my laptop. But something in me wouldn't allow it. The silence between us stretched, and with each passing second, the tension grew heavier. "Why does it sound like you're not sure?" I asked quietly, leaning forward just enough so my words were only for him. His expression froze. For a second, I thought he might turn and leave, that I had crossed some invisible line. But he didn't. He stood there, his jaw tightening, his eyes locked on mine with a mixture of defiance and fear. "I believe," he said at last, but the conviction wasn't there. His voice wavered just slightly, but enough to reveal the truth. Belief was what he was supposed to have, not what he necessarily felt. And that admission, however small, was more provocative than anything else he could have said. I leaned back, smirking faintly, though inside I was far more intrigued than I wanted him to know. "You don't sound convinced, David." His lips pressed together, his posture stiffening as though my words had hit something raw. He didn't answer right away, and the silence between us became charged. The cafe noise faded into the background. The cars, the footsteps, the conversations, all of it blurred until there was only the two of us. Finally, he broke eye contact, glancing at the ground before forcing another smile. It was the kind of smile people wear when they're barely holding their mask in place. "I should go," he muttered, but he didn't. His body leaned as though ready to turn away, yet his feet remained planted. He hesitated, his hands tightening on the strap of his bag, his chest rising and falling just a little too fast. And in that hesitation, I saw everything he was trying to hide. The doubt, the conflict, the pull of something he couldn't admit even to himself. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just another ordinary meeting in the city. It was the beginning of something else entirely. It started innocently enough, or at least it appeared that way to anyone watching from the outside. In New York, strangers cross paths 1,000 times a day, and most of those encounters vanish into nothing. But with David, it was never nothing. Every time I saw him, the air shifted, charged in a way that left me unsettled long after he walked away. The second time we crossed paths was on a rainy afternoon. I had ducked into a bookstore near Union Square to escape the downpour, shaking water from my jacket as I wandered between shelves. The store was nearly empty, just the faint hum of jazz from a speaker and the soft shuffle of pages turning somewhere in the back. When I turned a corner, there he was, standing in the philosophy section, a book open in his hands, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't notice me at first, and I watched him for a moment, caught between curiosity and something I didn't want to name. He looked completely absorbed, yet tense, as though even the simple act of reading carried weight. When his eyes finally lifted and landed on mine, his expression shifted instantly. Surprise, followed by hesitation, and then that same polite mask he always tried to wear. He closed the book a little too quickly, as if embarrassed to have been caught in the middle of something private. "You again," I said, my voice carrying more amusement than I intended. His lips pressed into a thin line. "Coincidence. Maybe it was, but I didn't believe it. Not really. New York is vast, yet the city has a strange way of collapsing into a small world when certain people are involved." I stepped closer, not enough to corner him, but enough to shorten the space between us. He shifted slightly, as though weighing whether to retreat, but didn't move away. "You don't strike me as the type to spend your free time wandering bookstores," I teased, leaning casually against the shelf opposite him. He glanced at the spine of the book still in his hand, then back at me. His voice was quieter this time, more hesitant. "I like questions, even the dangerous ones." That caught me off guard. For someone like him, raised in a world of absolutes, admitting to curiosity felt almost rebellious. I tilted my head, studying him. "And what's dangerous about reading?" The faintest flicker of a smile appeared, quickly hidden. "Depend on what you're looking for." The silence that followed was thick with something unspoken. I knew I should let him walk away, but I didn't. I wanted to press, to see how far he was willing to let himself be pushed. So I asked the kind of question that hung in the air long after it was spoken. "David, what is it you're actually searching for?" His gaze faltered. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I don't know." It was the first honest thing I had heard from him, and it landed between us like a spark. He quickly straightened, cleared his throat, and closed the book with a snap, retreating behind his careful politeness again. But the damage was done. A door had opened, even if he wanted to slam it shut. That night, I couldn't stop replaying in my head. His voice, his hesitation, the way his eyes seemed to plead with me not to ask, and yet also not to stop asking. It was dangerous, yes, but not in the way he imagined. The danger wasn't in what might happen between us, but in what was already happening inside him. The encounters kept coming after that. Always unexpected, always unplanned, or so he claimed. A chance meeting outside the library, a brief conversation on a crowded subway platform, a nod across the street that lingered too long. Each time, his mask slipped a little more, revealing cracks he couldn't quite hide. What unsettled me most was how quickly those exchanges turned into conversations. Real conversations, not the rehearsed lines he used with others. With me, he let things slip, little truths, small confessions, flashes of honesty he probably regretted the moment the words left his mouth. He talked about his family, about the weight of expectations, about how certainty was demanded even when he didn't feel it. I listened, pushing only when I saw that flicker of doubt in his eyes. He would grow quiet, withdraw, sometimes even walk away mid-sentence. And yet, a few days later, there he was again, back in front of me, as though pulled by something he couldn't resist. It became a rhythm. He would approach, let himself drift too close, then retreat in fear. Each time he left, I told myself it was the last. Each time he returned, I realized how wrong I was. One evening, we ended up sitting on a bench in the park. The city was loud around us, but the corner we had found was quiet, almost too quiet. He looked restless, his hands clasped tightly together, his gaze fixed on the ground. "You make this harder than it needs to be," he muttered suddenly, his voice sharp with frustration. I raised an eyebrow. "Harder for who? Me? Or you?" His head jerked up, his eyes burning with something raw. "You know what I mean?" I leaned back, refusing to let his intensity scare me off. "No, I don't." "Explain it." He exhaled shakily, dragging a hand down his face. "Every time I talk to you, I feel like I'm betraying something. My family, my faith, myself," he trailed off, shaking his head. "And yet I keep coming back." The honesty in his voice stunned me. For once, he wasn't hiding, wasn't covering his truth with polished phrases. He was admitting exactly what I already knew, that our conversations weren't harmless, not to him. I should have let him sit with that confession, but provocation slipped too easily from my tongue. "Maybe you're not betraying anything. Maybe you're finally telling yourself the truth." His expression darkened, his jaw tightening as though my words were dangerous. And they were. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way he looked at me like I was the one person who saw through every carefully built wall. He didn't answer. He just sat there, breathing hard, caught between staying and fleeing. And I realized then that this was the pull neither of us could deny. He wanted to run from me, but he also wanted to be near me. He wanted to silence the questions, but he couldn't stop asking them. The forbidden attraction wasn't in anything physical. It was in every word we spoke, every silence we let stretch too long, every glance that carried more meaning than it should. It was in the way he wrestled with himself, torn between the life he was told to live and the truth he was terrified to admit. And through it all, I found myself drawn deeper, even when I knew the danger it carried. Because with David, every moment felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, thrilling, terrifying, and impossible to walk away from. There are moments in life when silence weighs more than any word ever could, when the absence of truth screams louder than honesty. That was the silence David left me with, the kind that doesn't fade after a night's sleep or get buried under routine. It followed me everywhere, through crowded subways, quiet cafes, the restless nights where the city never stopped humming outside my window. It all began the day his family discovered us. Not us in the way people might imagine, not in the sense of stolen intimacy or reckless gestures. We had never crossed that line. What they found out was simpler, and yet to them it was enough to ignite suspicion. The frequency of our meetings, the way our conversations stretched too long, the unusual closeness between a devout young man from a conservative home and a stranger who asked too many dangerous questions. I didn't hear it from him at first. I heard whispers from others. A mutual acquaintance stopped me outside a cafe one morning, her eyes wide with the kind of pity I despised. "You should be careful," she said softly. "David's family is asking questions. They don't like the way he spends time with you." Her words landed like a blow. I brushed it off with a shrug, pretending indifference, but inside, I felt a chill. I knew his world was strict, that every step he took was scrutinized, but I hadn't realized how quickly suspicion could turn into accusation. When I finally saw him again, his entire demeanor had changed. Gone was the flicker of hesitation that made him human. Gone was the restless energy of someone trapped between two worlds. He stood straighter, colder, as though he had reinforced every wall inside himself. We crossed paths in the open, in a place where others could see. He greeted me with a smile, so polished it cut. "Aiden," he said, voice steady, too steady. "Good to see you." Something in my stomach twisted. He had never used that tone with me before. It wasn't warmth, it wasn't even neutrality. It was distance dressed as politeness. I tried to pull him aside, to speak to him away from the stares of strangers, but he didn't allow it. He kept his words public, visible, rehearsed. "I want to be clear," he said, his voice carrying further than it needed to. "We're not close. Whatever people think, it's not true. We've just spoken a few times, nothing more." The words hit harder than I expected. They weren't just denial. They were a deliberate erasure of everything we had shared. The hours on that park bench, the confessions whispered in half-light, the honesty that slipped through his defenses. He threw it all into the fire with one carefully constructed lie. I stood there, stunned, my mouth dry, unable to form a response before he turned his back to me. People had stopped to listen. A few heads nodded approvingly, satisfied by his performance of loyalty. I could feel their eyes on me, judging, dissecting, labeling. That moment shattered something inside me. Later, I told myself I should have understood. I knew the fear that governed his life, the crushing weight of family expectations, the sharp edge of their judgment. I knew why he did it, but understanding didn't lessen the wound. Betrayal feels the same, whether it's born of malice or of fear. I wandered the city for hours afterward, numb to the noise around me. The streets blurred, the neon lights smeared like watercolor against the wet pavement. My reflection in a shop window looked like a stranger, hollow-eyed, shoulders hunched, carrying a disappointment I hadn't wanted to admit was possible. In my head, I replayed every conversation we'd had. His hesitant admissions, his restless confessions, his eyes flickering with truths he couldn't voice. I had believed them. More than that, I had trusted them. And now, in one calculated moment, he had discarded them in front of everyone. The betrayal wasn't just in the words he spoke. It was in the way he delivered them, the steadiness of his voice, the precision of his denial. He hadn't stumbled or hesitated. He had chosen his performance carefully, and that choice cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Nights grew heavier after that. I tried to distract myself, filling my time with noise, with faces, with places where the city was too loud for memory. But no matter how I tried, his absence was louder. He hadn't just walked away. He had left me with the echo of his rejection. Sometimes, in the small hours of the morning, I caught myself wondering if he hated me now. If he cursed my name in prayer, if he blamed me for pulling him toward a truth he wasn't ready to face. Other times, I wondered if he hated himself more, if the steadiness of his denial was the only way he knew how to survive in a world that gave him no choice. But what stung most wasn't his family, or the whispers, or the weight of public judgment. What stung was that he had looked me in the eye and chosen to erase me. Chosen to erase us. There's a peculiar pain in being made invisible by someone who once saw you more clearly than anyone else. I tried, for a time, to harden myself against it. To tell myself I had been foolish, that I should never have trusted a man so bound by chains he could never break. But pain doesn't obey reason. It lingers, it gnaws, it twists the knife in the quietest hours. The betrayal was complete not because of what he said, but because of how deeply I had let him matter. And so I carried it, day after day, through the restless heartbeat of New York. A wound hidden beneath layers of sarcasm and distraction. A wound that throbbed every time I passed a street where we had once walked, every time I glanced at a bookstore window, every time I caught the faintest trace of his presence in the city that suddenly felt too small. He thought denial would protect him. Maybe it did, but it left me broken and nothing he could ever say would undo that moment. The city seemed to swallow me whole in the weeks that followed. New York has a way of moving on without you. The crowds don't wait. The trains don't pause. The neon lights burn just as brightly whether your heart is intact or fractured into 1,000 unspoken pieces. I told myself I was fine, that his denial had closed a door I never should have opened. I repeated it like a mantra while walking through the chaos of Manhattan, but inside I carried the sting of betrayal like a hidden wound. And then I heard the news. A mutual acquaintance, the same one who had once warned me, leaned in during a casual conversation and whispered. They made him stand before the congregation. He had to confess, repent, say he had strayed too far. The words hit me harder than his public denial ever had. I pictured him standing there, under the glare of 100 judging eyes, reciting lines fed to him by fear and expectation. A ritual of humiliation, a cleansing not of sins but of individuality. They hadn't just asked him to deny me. They had demanded he deny himself. For days after, I couldn't shake the image. David, stiff and obedient, bowing to their script. The thought made my stomach twist. And yet, part of me knew it wasn't obedience at all. It was survival. I saw him again weeks later, not by chance this time, but because he sought me out. His appearance startled me. His face pale, his eyes sunken, his posture brittle. He carried himself like a man who had been drained of something vital, as though every word he had been forced to say had carved a piece out of him. When he spoke, his voice was hollow. They said it would make me whole again, that confessing would bring peace. He laughed bitterly, a sound more painful than silence. But I feel emptier than I ever have. I didn't answer right away. What could I say to a man unraveling before me? A man who had chosen the path of safety over truth and found only despair. Part of me wanted to rage at him, to hurl accusations, to tell him that his choice had destroyed something in me. But when I looked at him, trembling in his own skin, I realized the punishment he was already living through was harsher than anything I could deliver. "You're losing yourself," I said quietly. He flinched, as if I had struck him. His eyes darted away, and I saw shame flicker there, mixed with desperation. I don't know who I am anymore. They want me to be someone I can't be. And every time I try, I feel like I'm vanishing. The confession was raw, dangerous. It carried the weight of years spent trying to fit into a mold that had never truly belonged to him. And in that moment, I understood. His collapse wasn't sudden. It had been building for years, every expectation pressing down until his foundation cracked. I listened as he poured out fragments of his struggle, the endless sermons drilled into him since childhood, the suffocating pressure to live a pure life, the constant fear of slipping into temptation. He spoke of the nights he stayed awake, pleading with himself to stop feeling what he felt, praying for a miracle that never came. His voice broke as he admitted that every word of repentance had tasted like ash in his mouth. "I thought I could bury it," he whispered. "If I said it enough times, maybe I could kill the part of me that's wrong." Something inside me snapped at that word. Wrong. How many people had made him believe that who he was could be reduced to a flaw, a sickness, a mistake to be corrected? My anger wasn't at him anymore. It was at the system that had molded him, the voices that had convinced him he was broken. "You're not wrong," I said sharply. "You're human. And if they can't see that, it's their blindness, not your sin." He looked at me as though I had spoken in a language he barely recognized. Hope and fear clashed in his eyes, neither strong enough to win. That night stayed with me long after he walked away again, still undecided, still bound by chains he didn't know how to break. I realized I couldn't keep waiting for him to choose me, or to choose himself. I had to choose for myself, and so I did. It began in small ways. I stopped apologizing for who I was in conversations, stopped lowering my voice when someone asked about my life. I started speaking openly about my truth, not as a weapon, but as a declaration of survival. The shame that had clung to me like a shadow began to dissolve, little by little, replaced by something unfamiliar but powerful: pride. It wasn't the loud, defiant pride of parades or slogans, though those had their place. It was quieter, steadier, a refusal to bow my head in the face of judgment. a determination to live without apology. The first time I introduced myself honestly to a new acquaintance, without editing or disguising parts of my story, I felt a strange rush of liberation. I realized then that the prison I had feared wasn't built entirely by others. Part of it had been my own silence. Accepting myself didn't erase the wound David had left, but began to heal something deeper. For years, I had carried the weight of society's disapproval like a chain, but watching him collapse under that same burden taught me a brutal truth. Denying yourself is the fastest way to lose everything. I thought often of him in those days. I wondered if he still sat in pews on Sunday mornings, reciting lines that felt foreign in his mouth. I wondered if he stared at his reflection in the mirror, searching for a version of himself he could stand to look at. I wondered if he envied me for the freedom I was carving, piece by piece, from the stone of my own fear. One evening, as I stood on the rooftop of my apartment building, the city stretched out in a sea of lights below me, I realized something profound. My journey wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, about living without shame, about refusing to collapse under the same weight that had crushed him. I whispered into the night, more to myself than to anyone else. I won't lose myself. Not for them. Not for anyone. And for the first time, I believed it. The pain of his betrayal hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it became a reminder that the choice to live honestly, though costly, was the only choice worth making. David's collapse had shown me the cost of denial. My choice was to rise from it. I had almost convinced myself I would never see him again. The city had a way of making disappearances permanent. People slipped through cracks, swallowed by new routines, different neighborhoods, endless distractions. Weeks passed into months, and though I tried to forget him, traces of David lingered everywhere. A corner cafe where he once laughed too quickly. A bookstore aisle where his hesitation had betrayed him. A church steeple I glimpsed against the skyline that reminded me of the cage he could never escape. By then, I had rebuilt myself piece by piece. The wound of his denial had scabbed over into something less raw, though not without scars. I had found a rhythm again, a way to breathe without waiting for him to return. My voice was steadier, my pride sharper. I had chosen my identity fully, refusing to shrink from it, no matter who judged me. And then one evening, as the city dimmed into twilight, he came back. I was leaving a small gallery downtown when I saw him standing across the street. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks. He looked different, not in clothes or stature, but in the way he held himself. His posture was less rigid, less armored. There was no polished mask on his face, no rehearsed smile, just rawness, exhaustion, and something else, resolve. He crossed the street slowly, as though every step cost him more than he could afford. My first instinct was to turn away, to deny him the chance he had once denied me. But I didn't move. I stood there, my arms folded, my heart hammering as he stopped a few feet from me. "Aiden," he said, and his voice cracked on my name. I didn't answer. I wanted him to feel the weight of silence, the same silence he had left me with. He took a shaky breath. I was a coward. The words startled me. I had expected excuses, justifications, anything but that simple, unguarded confession. I let fear dictate every choice, he continued. Fear of my family, fear of my faith, fear of losing everything I'd been told mattered. And in the process, I lost the only thing that was real. His eyes locked onto mine, burning now, not with hesitation but with determination. "I lost you." Anger rose in me, sharp and bitter. "You didn't just lose me, David. You threw me away. You erased me in front of everyone, like I was nothing." His face twisted with pain. "I know, and I will regret it for the rest of my life." He stepped closer, his voice trembling. "But I can't keep hiding. Not from them. Not from myself. Not from you." I studied him, searching for the cracks in his resolve, waiting for the flicker of doubt that always betrayed him. But this time I didn't see it. There was fear, yes, but beneath it, a steady flame. "You expect me to believe that?" I asked coldly. "After everything?" "No," he admitted. "I don't expect you to believe me right away. I expect you to doubt me, to push me away, to question every word. But I'm still going to say it. I won't hide anymore. Not for them. Not for anyone. I'm done living as a shadow of myself. The honesty in his tone disarmed me. This wasn't the polished, careful David who had once chosen the safety of denial. This was a man standing on the edge of ruin, finally willing to risk the fall. I turned away, pacing a few steps, trying to calm the storm inside me. Part of me wanted to tell him to leave, to vanish back into the world that had shaped him. But another part, the part that remembered his confessions in the dark, his eyes begging to be seen, wanted to believe him. What changed? I asked, finally, my voice low. He hesitated, then spoke with quiet intensity. When they forced me to confess, I thought I could live with the emptiness. I thought obedience would keep me safe. But safety is nothing if you're hollow inside. Every day since, I've been dying a little more. Until one morning, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. And I realized I'd rather lose everything than lose that last piece of me. I turned back to him. His hands were trembling, but his eyes held steady. For the first time, I believed he wasn't performing. He wasn't repeating lines fed to him by anyone else. These words were his own, pulled from the wreckage of his collapse. Still, the wound he had left in me throbbed. Trust doesn't rebuild itself in a single confession. You hurt me, I said simply. His voice broke as he answered, I know, and I will spend as long as it takes to make it right. But I can't start unless I stop lying to myself. So here it is. I want to live the truth. Even if it costs me my family, my place, everything I've known. I choose to be real. The silence that followed was heavy, stretching long enough for the city noise to fill the space between us. I searched his face again, waiting for the mask to slip. But it didn't. Something shifted in me then. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But recognition. He had changed. The boy who once crumbled under fear was gone. In his place stood a man willing to fight, not against me, but against the chains that had bound him his entire life. I let out a slow breath, my anger cooling, replaced by a cautious ache. You're late, I murmured. A faint, broken smile touched his lips. I know, but I'm here. It wasn't a perfect ending. Life rarely offers those. But it was a beginning. Not an escape into fantasy, not a flight into secrecy, but a step forward, uncertain, dangerous, but real. In the weeks that followed, he didn't disappear again. He showed up. He spoke openly, even when it shook his voice. He faced the whispers, the stares, the judgment, and though it bruised him, he didn't crumble. And I, still guarded, found myself slowly lowering my defenses. One evening, as we walked side by side through the city lights, he said quietly, I don't know what the future looks like, but I know it won't be lived in shadows. I nodded, feeling something unfamiliar stir in me. Not fear, not bitterness, but hope. Our story hadn't ended in betrayal or collapse. It hadn't ended at all. It had turned into something else, a step into freedom, a shared defiance against the weight of shame. For the first time, I believe we weren't defined by what we had lost, but by what we dared to claim. And so we walked on, two men scarred but unbroken, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. The future was uncertain, but it was ours.